I should be recording the graph physics video presentation. So I guess we'll do comments to start and see where we go from there. I don't know. It doesn't seem very inspiring. But nothing does lately. Because, yeah, people are impossible, pretty much. So, just, yeah, I've drawn that conclusion. Impossible to communicate with in a manner which demonstrates them to be wrong and you to be right. You don't want to hear that. Or vice versa. Anyway, how do you explain black holes, gravitational lensing, gravitational waves, and frame drag without GR? Well, how do you explain it with it? Okay. Yeah. Oh, you do because you have no accountability. You have a non-force making stuff happen and therefore don't have to account for any consequences or symptoms. None whatsoever, because it's all just magic. You just say it magically happens. Obviously, I've done all of those subjects. Black holes, I don't think there are any singularities. I don't think black hole is, I think, a bad theory, especially when they start talking about little black holes, because then they'd be all over the place and we would see them. The whole thing is wrong-headed, okay? Mass is a real thing, and yes, you can compress mass more or less. Now, this sort of might come up later with hydrogen. I mean, it floats, because it's buoyant, because it's a big atom, big, okay? It takes up a lot of space, and doesn't have much mass in it. So it consumes space, but it doesn't have much mass. Black holes are the inverse, okay? They're stuff made so it's all in arrangement, and if you put them all in arrangement, they take up less space. So it's like a bag of Legos, right? If I have a bag of Legos and I don't have them put together, they take up more volume. I have to put them in a bigger container. Then if I stack them all together into a little brick, they'll take up less volume. All right, so that does away. So yes, there's dense objects, but there's not black holes. Gravitational lensing is a big pile of crap. Okay, there's no evidence of it. The images are all mathematically impossible. The lens is the exact wrong shape. This is a magnifying lens. The lens for gravity goes this way. It's a bow tie. Ain't going to work. Ain't going to be a magnifier at a distance. So it doesn't make any mathematical sense. The geometry's all wrong. It's a silly theory, and the images absolutely suck. And that they have no symmetry. They're wobbling. They're distorted. They're all out of any, they have no symmetry, and they should. Strong gravity has symmetry, so it's debunkable easily. Gravitational waves, again, says you. So you really think matter, actual matter, is somehow converted into bent space through some Einstein didn't think so. Einstein stated you wouldn't see a gravitational wave even if there was one, and even if you were standing 10 feet away from it, you still wouldn't notice it because it's so frickin' weak, as a concept. The only way you wave something with gravity is to move the center of its gravity. Okay, that's how you change something's gravitational influence, is to change its center of gravity, like the sun does. The sun's center of gravity is precessing. That's why Mercury's precessing. So you could bring up Mercury's precession, and I could explain that to you too. There's viable explanations. You just don't care. So, I mean, there's a playlist of subjects, on this channel. And if you care, I have already answered these questions. But again, and in frame drag, there's no frames. The speed of light is the same everywhere in space. And basically, the argument that you can't tell who's moving, well, yes you can. If you have a light clock, you can tell who's moving. GR is superfluous and vacuous as an explanation. It provides no new information whatsoever, and it's silly in the sense of this idiotic notion that there's a place called time. Time is not a place. Time is not a dimension. Time is a function. And it just exists because the fastest thing in the universe is slow. That's why there's time. It's because things can't get from here to here instantaneously. They have to be moved, and it takes time to move. And that's it. And that's all time is. How fast does stuff move. Alright. mean, it's just, you know, his expectation was that the single video would have the answer to all of the questions in it. Silly expectation. All right, last 3 minutes buffering YouTube. Yeah, but whatever. The end of the video is broken. So what? Oh, what a huge crisis. You couldn't figure it out. All right, but whatever. Who cares? I mean, you know, the stuff you people worry about. Anyway, I guess I'll have to read this because he does an and thing. Okay, how did the light subject go so heavy? I don't know what that even means. Example, clearly in material liquids, water drops are round and surfaces are flat, snowflakes. And this is good example of it. Winking. I don't know. Clearly, the subject gets a little. You know, you have to do it for each kind of thing. You know, the transmission versus the reflection versus the refraction. You know, you got 3 or 4 different kinds of things that are happening, but they're all related to each other in the sense that they all have to do with surfaces and the transition from one medium to another, and what happens to a piece of energy when it encounters a surface. What percentage reflects, what percentage gets through, and what condition that percentage is in when it gets through. Like I would argue it can have pieces broken out, or it can change the angles at which they move, and therefore their phase is altered, blah blah blah. But yeah, a lot of it covered in the video, but yes, it could have been done better. But it was a response video, a cold response video. I hadn't previously watched the video. But anyway, and much appreciate the work you are doing. Would be nice if people talked this subject without coming pre-conclusions. Well, it'd just be nice if they knew how to argue something other than irrelevant mush, and could actually argue the experiments and point out how the experiments decisively prove something. Like point out how the gravitational images are really, really good. You know, like they make mathematical sense, that they're exactly what they should look like. It's exactly what Einstein predicted when, you know, Einstein didn't predict you'd see them. You know. So anyway, because clearly most of us are clueless. Isn't it part of the fun? No. Yes, right. Most of you are clueless and kind of useless to the purpose of this channel. The purpose of the channel is to make the stark contrast between the conventional silly theory, the religion, and what I'm going to claim is my evolution theory. That doesn't require all of these magical multiverses and silly, idiotic notions like this piece of chalk is really in more than one place at the same time. I mean, just absolutely silly descriptions of reality that are so under-evidenced, you know, it's preposterous that they have any credibility at all. All right. Also, there's another also, so I guess I'll read the first piece of crap first. You can be an atheist and believe in magic, genius. Can you? I mean, isn't the whole point of, you know, what makes religion so obnoxious is the very notion of belief without reason? And isn't believing in magic saying, I'm going to suspend reason and say, I'm going to say, oh yeah, he really did pull a bird out of his sleeve. You know, the bird wasn't already shoved in his sleeve. He just magically made bird. I'm going to believe something stupid. Something that doesn't have any corroborating evidence. You know, you're just going to sit there and assume being fooled is being educated. You know, I don't know. Well, it just doesn't make any sense. But fine, if you can't see that they're the same thing, that God is a magical explanation for our existence, not a rational one, and that you can do the same thing for everything else. You can have this magical notion that the chalk is really in more than one place. You know, you can do that. I can't stop you, but it's not reasonable. All right. So, fuck you. Then some asshole, I don't know, some troll in this comment still there. I believe in magic in a young girl's heart. Blah blah blah. Some kind of whatever. Just there's just so many assholes. Just so many of them. All right, I'll get rid of that one anyway. Also, Carroll bends over backwards to point out that not all physicists agree with him. You're just missing the whole point. I barely even touched on his multiverse bullshit. Okay, that wasn't what I was showing in the video. I was showing that he has a whole bunch of beliefs, just like the rest of the conventional physicists. They insist light is a wave. They insist that there's such a thing as superposition. They insist on a whole list of things that are just absolutely nonsense that the rest of the physics people also believe in. So don't, pretend that you can't figure out what I was arguing with. I mean, obviously I point out he's even doubled down on silly by jumping to this stupid multiverse as an answer bullshit. Which is doubling down on silly. But the real point is that the conventional physics that they're building their silly on is silly. That's why they can make sillier stuff, is because they have a whole bunch of silly as a foundation to base it on. So you're just not getting the point. I mean, he's attempting to defend his quantum mechanics of many worlds by first, really narrowing the description of quantum mechanics. And that description, though, is one that a lot of physicists agree with, the presumptions he's using. All right, so most don't, in fact, not a problem. So you just don't think it's a problem. I think it's a gigantic problem. And, I think you're just an example of why the problem persists, is because you're just going to sit there and say, well, he knows better than me, and I'll just applaud. And it's not even good magic they're doing. Like I say, if they came to you with a lot of experiments and showed you this magic happening, but what do? They draw pictures of like the two-slit experiment with detectors and do all kinds of lying about what actually took place. Then they, just mildly reference some other experiment somewhere. But they don't do you any, they don't show you any demonstrations of this woo in practice. They just do examples that are contrived. Well, look, I put a little dog in this box and I put a cat in this box, and the special box machine pops out a dog over here and a cat over there. But they don't even, they're not even real experiments. They're just made up simulations of something completely different, and then they claim that's illustrating the fact that that's how it really works. That there's all these, if this one's a cat, then that one's a dog, blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. All right. So, yeah, it's a big problem. You didn't get the point of the video, so forget it. All right, it's another pile of crap kind of comment anyway. Most of what you're saying throughout this video reiterates the points I made in the comments of mine that you chose to overlook. Yeah, not every comment gets read just because of the circumstance, but I could have read it and it was crap anyway. And it's not I'm reiterating you. You're just reiterated what I said in the damn video. You didn't say anything profoundly new. You just said it worse, frankly. Anyway, we're on the same page, dude. Well, we're obviously not, bitch, because you can't even figure out that I don't think dude is a proper way to reference another human being. I'm not your fucking dude. Oh God, you pretentious fuck. Anyway, VHS was far worse product than Beta. Yeah, but it was only that it was twice as inexpensive, wasn't it? Was it or was it not half the friggin' price? It might have actually been 1/3 the price. And you're surprised that VHS won. It cost 1/3 less. And you're surprised that it won. Yes, it'd be nice if we all had Apple computers. We could all have $10,000 computers. That would all be all so special and nice. But it's just so fucking impractical. So yes, Beta lost because Beta was fucking expensive. Go take one apart, okay? I've done it. There's like at least 4 times as much electronics, and then who knows, the spinning head thing and all that kind of crap, how that has to be different. So just What is your answer? Conspiracy? No. It's just perfectly logical that, yes, the American consumer said, I'll take what's good enough. Give me something good enough. I'll take that because it's 1/3 less. We all buy cheap, Chinese crap. Why? Because we can't always afford Sony. Oh, shit. Anyway. Had more advertising dollars to convince the public to buy their ideas. No, again, it was clearly just a price. That was it. Price. The superior technology, just going to go on and on about this, or the right answer requires the right face and personality to sell it. So you think that conventional physics has had the right face to sell it. It's not that the physicists actually bought into the less than evidenced arguments being made. No, it has something to do with selling it. And it has something to do with the promoters being great promoters or something. No, as it just has to do with the fact that once they start down a road that's wrong, like maybe 4 days after Benjamin Franklin said plus and minus and had them reversed, maybe 4 days after he did that, somebody could have said, hey, Ben, I think you got those backwards, right? So maybe we should fix that because here's the experiment that kind of demonstrates the stuff is really going this way and it's not going the other way, so why don't we fix that? And it would have been fixable. But once everybody got stuck with it and used to it, it gets so hard to get rid of it because then everybody has to admit, oh, we were so stupid. Oh, we sure fucked that up. And they don't want to admit they've invested half their life in a wrong idea. So it gets really hard to get the old ideas out. Just like religion. Nobody wants to let go of the tradition. Well, my mommy was religious, my grandmommy, and blah, 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 blah. And it's a little fairy story that they hold on to out of tradition. Nothing else. It's just a traditional thing. Everybody I know is one. That kind of bullshit. Alright. Okay, as much as it hurts you to do so, you must realize that you are still working with pathetic, low-life human beings. Yes, you people remind me of it all the fucking time. And that they have the money and the connections integral to propagating your great ideas. Again, I don't want them to propagate that way. They'll propagate if they get a fair fight. All right, if they're allowed to debate the conventional theory and show how this theory works and their theory doesn't, I win. And so I just want a nice little fair fight and to win the argument. Okay, I'm not really interested in selling it. And I don't think selling it was what you do to intelligent people. I mean, you're being even more insulting to intelligent people than I am, in the sense that I think, okay, deep down, physicists don't want to have the wrong answer, that deep down they do care about the truth, and deep down they don't want to be, educating people wrong. I don't think Physics Girl wants to be selling crap, being a snake oil salesman, I think if it's made, if she's forced to accept that, oh, you're right, maybe this is been a real huge mistake and we really should have thought about this whole idea of letting nothing tell something how to move. That is kind of a nonsense idea. And, dimensionalizing time, well, that is a little problematic because there's absolutely no way to imagine such a fucking thing. But anyway. Blah, blah, blah. And money and connections integral to propagating your great ideas. The rest of it is religion. Well, whatever that means. I'm saying that most all of it is religion. They're only clinging to it out of tradition, and the fact that, again, admitting that it was wrong means that they have to sort of apologize for being such a dupe and a fool. Not figuring out they had the wrong answer. I mean, it's embarrassing. Scientists with no adherence to the ethics behind the scientific method. Well, that's the real key point that I made, is clearly that's what was the radical change. None of the evidence changed from Newton's time to Einstein's time. The only thing that changed is the willingness to just make up a story where Newton wasn't willing and Einstein was. All right. attempting to establish themselves as corrupt religious leaders with secret information that can change the lives of those they manipulate. So I don't think there's any of that going on. It's just a wrong-headed idea. And yeah, I part of me says that these people had to be, maybe it's a kind of a nerd syndrome, growing up in some sort of protected reality, where I guess they weren't cynical enough to think about just how wacky all of this was sounding. Well, the fact that most evolutionary scientists like Dawkins can't even figure out that animals feel, he has to be kind of badgered by it. Oh, you mean they're not that distinctly different than us? I mean, we're doing mathematics that we learned, by going to school for 17 years, and but theoretically, there's not much difference in the idea of being conscious and alive and sensitive and feeling and having a good day and a bad day. That all the animals are doing that. I mean, that has to be explained to to these people. That's almost laughable. So I mean, they do have a cluelessness that's maybe just part of nerdophobia or something. Nerdorama. Anyway. So she responded to some troll. You can respond to trolls on your channel, okay? Don't do it on my channel. Thank you. Didn't even think about that when I made the reply. Didn't think Gary has any spirituality whatsoever. Well, clearly don't. But I do think that he could benefit from understanding the psychology of humans he's trying to convince. Understanding it in what sense? Your psychologies are all broken. Okay, in the sense that you're the ones who are clueless about the fact that you have a psychology and that you clearly overreact and insanely react. And that's why there's all these trolls, is they have this silly little life, this little inner life where they feel like they're winning by being irrelevant, obnoxious, distracting, and making noise. Just walking around with their drum banging on it like, I won the argument. I mean, they're so fucking retarded. What is there to understand? Retardation is annoying? Yes, I already understand that. Retards are fucking annoying. Okay. So, she's having a conversation with someone, Dwan. Anyway. Mark, but this tick, and mark it, and mark in this how little that which thou does me is, poetry, just absolute crap. Oh God. All right, Dick. I don't know. Anyway, Lyme disease goes great with Corona-chan, whatever that is. So somebody's supposed to know what this. I mean, Lyme disease jokes are hilarious. Somebody's had Lyme disease 11 times. Maybe I won't find them too funny. So we really don't need any of this crap, whatever this crap is. Crap, it's what it is. It's just crap. So yes, this whole chain of crap can be lived without. It really has nothing to do with the subject. And I think your theory is insufficient. Incomplete. Anyway. Gary, why do you bother wearing rings? Because I happen to fall into them. And so I'm wearing them. Yeah. Because that's what somebody should wear them. If there were a bunch of rings just laying around, what would you say? Gee, it's kind of a waste for somebody not to wear them, so I'll wear them. That's why I'm doing it. Silly. It really catches the eye. I just don't know. See, you can say it does that, but I really don't think it does in any negative way. I mean, the chalk is right where the ring is, right? So it's like, it's helping you see. Yeah. Stuff people worry about. Just hate this planet. Alright, and then Mr. Keebler gets trolled for a spelling mistake. Okay, that's just too special, so we'll remove all of that crap. I just can't stand it. Anyway, so this is the hydrogen comment. Alright, hydrogen is a proton and an electron, no neutron. So, yes, I was inaccurate, but I'm just saying the point. See, this is the whole thing. You just don't want to preserve the point. You want to just instead get into a semantical wrangle about when a neutron's a neutron and when a proton's a proton, or a nucleus is a nucleus, or whatever. So we'll do a little drawing on this subject. Just to be clear. All right, so conventional physics is fairly comfortable with the idea that by mass, it sort of indicates this way, that a neutron is in fact just a proton and an electron. And so it comes out right in that the neutron just weighs a little tiny bit more than a proton, and that would be the little tiny electron. So, and then when it decays, this is what they sort of find as a proton and electron. So my argument would be is that the simple difference between a hydrogen atom, H1, all right, but it gets complicated because there's H2 and H3, but anyway, is that the hydrogen is, the electron is much further away from the proton than in the neutron. So the neutron is heavy because it doesn't occupy as much space. But for the hydrogen to occupy space, it usually has to be part of something. Okay, like another atom of hydrogen. So you could argue that the way it stays in its position, with the electron further away, is to have two dipoles essentially. So it would be like you could call either one of these technically a neutron, okay, and you could think of it like this distance is the neutron distance, right, and this distance would be the hydrogen distance. But it's one way of thinking about it or looking at it. But you just have a balance between the repulsive forces and the attractive forces, and you can understand how that configuration would be very durable. And that's all you're trying to find, is the durability of something. Now, the only way that this hydrogen atom, I could say, could be feasible for the electron to be in association with the proton in some sort of distance, to be able to maintain the distance, I would argue, is that the hydrogen and the electron the electron isn't orbiting the proton. I know that stuff happens. What's happening is the two of them are in a circumstance where they're moving around each other. So the whole atom is spinning. And so when a hydrogen atom is by itself, it's spinning. And then when it gets molecularized, that is, you start cooling it or doing something else, it becomes a lot more dense. It doesn't float in the air anymore, right? And why isn't it floating? It's because you've reduced this distance by cooling it, by taking the spins out of it, all right, and converting it into something that's arranged hydrogen. So, and then you have to understand that this is your minuses, and these are your pluses, and so you're essentially creating, like the neutron, it's a dipole. So the neutron, I would argue, is seen as a neutral particle only because it's a tiny dipole, and it's so small that from a distance you can't see it anymore. Just like magnets from a distance, with their north and their south, you can see that, right? Yeah, well enough. From a distance, all you see is an S. Okay, you see both. You don't see the distinction between the two anymore. The two forces blend into each other, and all you get is the idea that there's nothing there. There's just as much pull as there is push, and it would appear as a neutral from a distance. That's what it is. It's neutral. And that's why a proton is considered neutral, even though it's clearly not neutral. It's clearly a strong dipole. Strong dipole. I'll get it right eventually. Plus and minus in blue. I shouldn't have minuses. Blue. Alright, so what I was talking about was just this stacking argument. And so when you get up to the the helium nucleus, then you're talking about 4 protons and 2 electrons. I believe that's it. But two of the protons are really neutrons. So I mean, they have the electrons with them, and all you're doing is adding the extra bits, like here. Well, that would be a white one. And and over here. Yeah, so you'd have an extra proton over here. So you're maintaining the distance argument. You're also creating something that's positive on the outside and negative on the inside. I don't know what else needs to be said. I'm just saying that this is chemistry, right? And I haven't done a whole bunch of this chemistry stuff, but I'm saying these atoms are not round things. When they connect to each other, they have shapes, that there's geometry, that the real shape of the stuff is going to be a geometry, of connecting these positive and negative things together based on attributes. Like you could argue that the hydrogen, when it's connected to an oxygen, it may in fact be unintuitive, in the sense that the water molecule doesn't absorb the extra proton into it. I mean, it's a separate oxygen molecule. I think it's got 8 things out here, and the idea would be is that the hydrogens, what they're doing is wedged in there, so they're wedging a proton. So if those were electrons, let's just reverse the color for the sake of this argument. So if those are electrons, the proton end of the hydrogen is the one connecting, or going maybe even in here deeper. All right, and then it's producing the 2 electrons on the surface that are pushing these electrons over here, and that's why you only end up with 2 hydrogens that stick easily to the surface, and not like 4 hydrogens. I don't think there's any H4O2. There's H2O4, hydrogen peroxide, I think. Well, anyways, I don't want to get into a whole bunch of chemistry. But anyway, but yeah, the atoms are magnetically held together. This is one of those fundamental things that the Sean Carrolls of the world and the rest of conventional physics, they want to make everything electrical, and then they're doing this spinning thing. And Sean Carroll made, I don't really want to play his video, but it's already played enough of his crap. But he's arguing that physics says that because the electron, when it's spinning around the atom, the idea is it's creating electromagnetic waves all the time when it's moving, because it's banging into a field and it's forcing all of this energy to come out all the time, right? Which we don't see. And then his argument is that obviously means that the electron would have to crash into the proton in a millisecond. And that's just because they just made all this up. There's no reason that it has to do any of that. They're just making up this theory that somehow there's more force on the electron when it's moving than when it's not moving. Now, I would argue that drag would kill it, okay, because electrons are subject to drag, but it wouldn't instantaneously fall into the proton. It'd take a little while for the drag to absorb all of its energy. But they've just made this argument that there's a field it's making energy while it's moving, in a field somewhere, and and so they're using that as a proof that, that's why we have to turn electrons into things that don't have a place, that their superposition is anywhere in here somewhere, in this cloud, right? They're going to just make a cloud, and that's the electron, it's a cloud thing. When they know it's not, they know it's a point particle, all of that stuff, and it's just, it's such a nasty defense of why they're allowed to cloud it, because now the cloud doesn't have to fall in because the cloud isn't moving, or some other kind of crap, because it's all superpositions of positions. They don't have to move to the actual positions, and therefore they don't have to go through any of the space, and the space is an ether and doesn't have to plow through the ether and use up energy. So it's all a convoluted pile of mush. And to me, the obvious answer is to think of the the atom as the north and south idea. You know, that these are poles, okay? And all you're doing is balancing attraction and repulsion to keep atoms together. So if I put a bunch of electrons around here and I understood them as poles, as all south poles, I mean, I could do this, you know, with a pane of glass. I could put flat magnets in there, and I could put the south side up of these four, and I could put the north side up of this one. And if I balance them, just if I put them in the right positions, the repulsion between these magnets, okay, will make it impossible for them to move into the middle anymore. And the tension between those two forces, the repulsion between the electrons, and the attraction to the north side, will keep the structure in one piece. And I could even jolt it a little bit and jolt it, and it still won't break down. It'll be durable. And that's the foundations of chemistry, is these geometries where you've balanced the pressure between the electrons with the pressure to move towards the protons. And the internal nucleus is balanced by that simple argument I gave you about the neutron, you know, and the fact that if I put an electron here and then I put another proton over here, so I have a neutron, and if a neutron comes in contact with a proton, it seems, you know, kind of obvious that, you know, by my theory, all of the energy, the repulsive energy between the protons would end up being dissipated. It couldn't get trapped in here anymore because it'd all go out perpendicularly out of the electron, and all the electron force obviously would also go out of the proton. But the point would be is that there'd be a very low pressure. So it's not a strong force holding the proton to the neutron. It's a weak force. It's the absence of force that allows the protons to get really close to each other. Now, yeah, one of the protons is the core of a neutron, but it really doesn't matter, because once they're in contact with each other, these distances will equalize, and what you really end up with is a two-pole neutron, you could argue. But anyway, but the magnetic model works, and it's just so much more logical, right? I mean, they give you this silly notion that these electrons are binding atoms by swirling around in figure 8 patterns. You know, the electron goes over here, and then it goes over to this. You know, they have two atoms, and somehow you're supposed to believe that these two atoms stay together, even though the electron ends up way over here. That somehow that's going to make this atom want to stick to this atom. When, no, it isn't. It's going to make this one want to leave. There's nothing here holding them together. They're really, when they're sharing, they're really sharing. And the evidence indicates that. The idea that you have to put in a certain amount of energy to break them free, and the idea that you have to smash them together with a certain amount of energy to get them in that position where they'll share the electron. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. So yeah, that's all. This was just sort of a back and forth about that. I don't know if there's anything useful here. But where are you getting this information? From fake math and chemistry. Everyone knows Gary is the true source of all knowledge. Well, all that we know is that you can't make an explicit, real argument counteracting anything I've said. That's all we have. We see you not citing any links to any experiments that disprove anything I'm saying. We don't see you making any kind of rational arguments about how I'm wrong about something. You frickin' useless troll. Well, we just so let's see what this is. And did I hear you correctly that you're saying a neutron contains a proton and an electron? Yes, that part you heard correctly. I'm saying it becomes indistinguishable once it's in the atom. That's why the neutron is durable. When it's in the atom, it's not spinning anymore. When it's out of the atom, it's spinning, and that's why it can stay in its position. It's more durable. I mean, it's less durable. It's because the electron is the only way it doesn't just connect to the proton is because of the idea that it's what's the word I'm looking for? It has no stability unless it's inside an atom, and that's why it decays when it's outside the atom, is because it's it's moving when it's outside the atom. It has to rotate, and the rotation slowly but surely breaks it apart. But it depends on how it's spinning, right? So you could argue that the neutron the bit is really just rotating around the surface of the proton. And obviously when it's in an atom, it's not rotating anymore. And then when it's free, it starts spinning. And the more it spins, then the more likely it is to eventually spin out. So that's enough of that. So here's her other comment. All right. Science is becoming a religion. Well, I'm saying it's just like religion in the sense that it's not founded on any strict adherence to let's compile a bunch of evidence, like the Darwin example. Let's compile a whole bunch of evidence proving something. Instead, physics is compiling almost no evidence and just making, just quote mining the experiments. You know, the wave example, water waves works as an example in the two-slit example. Water waves doesn't work in the single-slit example, and water waves don't work in the multi-slit example, right? So they're quote mining the evidence, and they have a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of it. So yes, that's a pretty much, you know, an indefensible practice for people calling them scientists. Scientists want to be priests. So, I don't think that's necessarily what they're after. They want, like everybody else is, to be heroes. To become priests, they need secret knowledge to exert power. There's no secret knowledge. So again, you're saying they have some sort of secret or better knowledge. They really don't. All they have is a little bit of mathematics. And, you know, there's a barrier to that because they don't put anything in real human terms. Their symbols are all Greek or Latin or some other kind of horse shit. To exert power over others. This is why many of the scientists use mathematics to frame and obfuscate data, facts, and observations in order to make understanding really less accessible. I don't think that's what's happened, but it's the better example is like the wave equation and the de Broglie thing where, you know, they find some relationship in one circumstance where frequency does equal momentum, and then they assume that that applies to everything. And so they could apply their wave equation to dice you're rolling at the casino. They could just put a black tarp over the whole thing so you can't see the dice roll, and they could just do the wave equation thing. We could say we have 6 sides, we know these are the probabilities. Because we don't see the dice, they could say, well, all the dice faces are changing all the time and they're randomizing all the time. They're in superpositions. Each face is 6, 1, 2, 4, 3. You know, each face has every face on it, and blah blah blah, and then the outcome. So they could use their wave equation and get the right answer, but they're only getting the right answer because we already know it's a probability. We already know that the faces of the dice and the fact that there's only 6 of them is the variable that's going to decide what the possibilities are, and all you're doing is randomizing that. And so it's a pretty simple wave equation. So their math will work for something you absolutely know the real reason it's getting randomized is because it's creating enough, so many interactions that the variables are all getting mixed by the number of interactions. Like one interaction is getting undone by another interaction by another one, and you never know how many times, how much, wobble in one direction happened. You can't see any of it. You can't see any of the imbalances created in the end result because they do a whole bunch of imbalancing. So you don't know whether it's one extra this way or one extra that way. But anyway, I think I made my point. That they exaggerate the significance of the math in terms of they make it sound like the math is pulling something else out of the reality when all it is the variables, like in the two-slit experiment. The distance between the two surfaces, the distance to the target, the frequency of the light. The variables are easily understood, and they make it seem like they're doing something magical to them when it's only Pythagorean math. Pythagorean. Anyway, use mathematics frame blah 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 order of understanding really less accessible. Their actions lack ethics and don't conform to the rules of the scientific method. Well, obviously that's the key thing. Is the new science doesn't need to repeat an experiment, doesn't need to do it like in different environments and try fiddling with it and messing with it in any way. They always just quote mine the experiment for these conditions, create these results, and then they'll say that's the experiment and that's all the experiment can produce. When, you know, you could argue that, you know, like in an interferometer, tilting the mirror is just as critical as moving the mirror in and out in terms of causing effects, and they don't pay any attention to the effects of tilting. Let's see. Their actions lack ethic. Okay. They put personal gain in front of scientific advancement. Well, I'm just saying we're all capable of being distracted by our what's in it for me thing, and I don't think that's what's causing it. I think their passion is somewhat sincere. That they're just, like I said, they're so invested in it they can't even imagine that, oh, what if we're wrong? I just don't think they've thought about that enough or at all. Thank you dearly. I have spent too many hours watching Ken when he mentioned seeing ghosts and dead spirits, well, 3 times. So, yeah, I mean, Ken is obviously a religious fuck, and he'll claim detachment, but it's all this new age mush. But, you know, clearly his physics is pretty wooey. BS, if you can't handle the truth, get lost. And Ken doesn't even know the real over unity machine, so why bother? The real over unity machine. Yeah, the real one. It's just hilarious. Yes, go invent it. Tesla over unity research maniac. Well, at least you got that part right, the maniac part. Yes, I shouldn't look, right? It'll be quite depressing. Oh, good, no videos. All right, I don't have to worry about it. You know, it's just Tesla nuts. So depressing. All right, so we'll probably just call it a day. No point in going this far back. I wonder who I was commenting to. What happens to the light that destructively interferes? Oh, those are all the questions. Okay, yeah, so I'll have to get a link to that video and put it in the description just so people know where the questions are. And obviously no one's added any because no one's very helpful at all. Questions for conventional science to try to force them to accept, okay, that their theory is too under-evidenced for such strong advocacy. Extraordinary claims, less than ordinary evidence. All right, so that would be all. Oh, that's a nice, you know, magnet. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, enough of a video and such. So till the next time, and whatever. That's all I got to say. I mean, somebody cranked about how I should pay somebody for conversation. Obviously, I've offered money. I can't get them to go along. I didn't get any response to. You know, I've gone out and looked for a couple of these places where they'll do you science instruction over the phone, but none of them are willing to be interrogated, even though you're paying them. It's just really irritating. But anyway, I just can only do my part here, and so no one else seems motivated to do anything. You know, the dissidents, like I said, the only real chance the dissidents have is to create a theater, a way of pointing out how not necessarily that their dissidency in their particular alternative theory is right. The real point is to first point out how there needs to be a conversation about these fundamental assumptions in science. And you got to force physics to do that. We're going to have to bribe them to do that because they obviously don't want to be humiliated for free. You don't have to pay them to be humiliated by dissidents. But you have the same old crap like these freaking lame assholes. Science meets flat Earth challenge. There's no challenge to a flat Earth theory, right? I mean, the first premise is that every bit of satellite technology, every image taken from space is a lie, or taken even from high in the atmosphere. That right there is a non-starter, right? I mean, that's just too stupid. I mean, if you can't accept that there's real evidence of real photographs showing real curvature, you're just too much of a dishonest piece of shit to believe some conspiracy that every single image taken that shows an image from high in the atmosphere is a fraud. Is just a lie, a pathetic lie. It's like they're almost arguing that everybody's flown in an airplane is a liar. I mean, it's that bad. So why would you bother arguing it? Because it's easy. Yeah. I mean, it's so easy to mash that rotten potato. Anyway, nothing. It's just so bad. Alright, I'm done. So, till next time and such. I'm sorry if I offend you. Sorry if I'm not politically correct or whatever, socially correct. I really just don't see it as part of the agenda. I mean, the agenda really is to attack me with real physics arguments and to demonstrate that my theory is a lot more durable than their theory. Period. Till the next time.